Ezekiel chapter 14. Here, there's some, each time the elders of Israel in exile comes to his house to inquire of him. And each time the chapter starts with, and the word of the Lord came unto me saying, Son of man. Remember earlier in his commission, he was hog-tied, he was tied down, but now he's released, but he's still tongue-tied. See, I didn't realize this, that till even now, he is still tongue-tied in the sense that he could not speak for himself. Each time he opened his mouth, God speaks in and through him. That's something we have to be cognizant about, because later in the book, it says, now God loosened his tongue. That's a turning point in his ministry, where he now can speak. See, so what happens when the prophet is tongue-tied and could not speak? That means he could not plead with God to help. He could not pray to God for the people. So each time they come to inquire, they are perplexed. I can imagine a perplexing time there in exile, whereas Jerusalem at this moment still stands. It's like they have no news from there. Nobody has come over except from what they hear from Ezekiel. It's like, can he be trusted? But other prophets said, it's going to be over in 2 years. That we're going to be marching back, taking the treasures from the temple that Nebuchadnezzar stole. We're going to bring it back. So at this moment, they still hope that it's not going to be true, that Jerusalem will stand, even though they are in exile and are punished, they will go back. What they have family there, they have children there. It speaks constantly of their children left in Jerusalem. So these are probably the older folks, and what's happening to them? What's going to happen to them? So there is this anxiety there. So the first part of the book is to address this. So what is a prophet? A prophet is someone who prophesies and the prophecies comes true. But at this moment, the prophecies that Ezekiel said to them has not come true. So eventually, with the fall of Jerusalem and the next batch of survivors come to exile in Babylon, they see them. And these group of exiles would tell them, yeah, it was bad there. It was so bad. Then they realize Ezekiel is a true prophet of God. So then there is a turning point in which this exile said, it is our sin that caused us to be in this situation. So now how then shall we live? That's the turning point. So in every situation, especially in drug rehab or alcohol, the first thing is to identify that you have a problem. No, I can handle it. I'm not an alcoholic. No, just a touch. Until you acknowledge the problem, you will not face it. So they will eventually acknowledge the problem. And there are also, reading this book, you wonder why there's so many repetitions. We've heard that before. Understand that context. Again, it's different. We have these books with us. We've read it numerous times. So it's like, repetition. But it's real-time preaching. Maybe this group has heard, maybe this group hasn't. So you don't really know. So you have to go through the lessons again and again. And that's why we have so many repetitions. You've sinned, you've been idolatrous, you've been worshiping other idols, you've been sexually immoral, and you have to go through the litany of their sins. What constitutes righteousness, what constitutes sin. So that's why there's so much repetition there. Like I said, so in chapter 14, here is another group. I don't know if the same group, different group, but here they come to his house again to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said, Son of man. So here God speaks in and through him. So at this moment there are still hoping. They remember their scripture when Abraham prayed to God to plead for Lot and his family and Sodom and Gomorrah. If you find 50 righteous people in there, would you still destroy the place? No, I won't. If you find 5, then it went down to 5. 5 people, then this commentator says, maybe 5 righteous people in addition to Lot's family. That's interesting. We never thought of that. We thought that included Lot's family. Possibly it's like 5 more people in Sodom in addition to Lot's family. Then I will destroy the place. So here, I'm sure these exiles, these people who came to inquire of Ezekiel says, remember, Abraham prayed. There are 5 people. I'm sure there are 5 people, righteous people in Jerusalem. So it's always, they always probably have that in mind. Again, even in their situation, context is very different. You cannot say, well, if in any situation there are 5 righteous people, God will not destroy it. So that means you can have some kind of salvation through proxy is what it is. That hey, I have a righteous family. My family, my parents are ministers, so I can skate. Kind of things. But here, definitely in chapter 14 is there's no salvation through proxy. Each person, especially Jeremiah, has already 31:31 said this is the new covenant in the sense that each person, the individual will be responsible for their sins and their righteousness. No longer can you be counted as righteous by proxy. Your husband is religious and you're not. Pray for me and you're going to skate through. So definitely in chapter 14, Ezekiel said, not true. Verse 14 says, chapter 14, verse 14, though these men, Noah, Daniel, and Job were in Jerusalem, they should deliver but their own souls by their righteousness, saith the Lord. So even if I have this really renowned righteous person living, being contemporaries in Jerusalem right now, Noah, we know how righteous Noah was, Daniel, and Job, even if they were there, they could not save, they themselves will be saved, they could not save the city. Jerusalem will fall, but there will be survivors. We don't know. It doesn't say that the righteous will survive and those are the survivors. In any situation, wartime, famine, or whatever, there will be survivors. Not necessarily righteous people. All kinds will somehow survive. We know that Jeremiah survived and a group of people, and they went to exile in Egypt. And guess what the exiles did in Egypt? They continued to pray to the Queen of Heavens, to Ishtar. They continued their idol worship. So there you go. Not all who survive will be righteous people. Survivors will come across. There'll be a mixture of them. What it will happen to the righteous, we don't know. I'm sure God will preserve them, but these books are addressed to the righteous. Why would we really talk about the fate of the righteous? We talk about the fate of the unrighteous. So to warn them. Understand also that Ezekiel was a watchman. See, a watchman, a sentry up there who would warn, enemies coming. So if you do something and ward off the enemy, then you have done your job as a watchman. But if you see the enemy coming and you don't warn them, and that the city get besieged and die, then it'll be their blood will be on you. But if you warn the people and they did nothing and they died, then their blood will not be on you. Understand that Ezekiel was also a watchman. So he has a very difficult task. And not just, you cannot have salvation by proxy. God here says, God is actually, I will stretch out my hand upon it and break the staff of the bread and send a famine through and cut of man and beast from it. It is, this punishment is from the hand of God. And previously, Jeremiah would say, you will face the sword, famine, and pestilence. But here, because of the sin we read in chapter 22, the bloodshed in Jerusalem, they became even more wicked. And so here God added one more judgment to them. Verse 21, when I send my 4 sore judgments upon Jerusalem. 4. Instead of 3, there's 4. What? The sword, famine, noisome beasts, and pestilence, to cut off from it man and beast. Noisome beasts. We are not told what they are, but that God did add an added judgment that they had to face. And here, there's a little note here when the 3 righteous men were mentioned: Noah, Daniel, and Job. They don't really know who this Daniel is. Is it the same Daniel that wrote the book Daniel? We're not told. There are people who say it's not the same Daniel, because we know that Daniel was a contemporary of Ezekiel, that he went into exile. That could his name be well known among the exiles at this moment? I think so. I would like, I hold a conservative view. That's why I like the series. They hold a very conservative view, that I like to think that it could be another Daniel, but no one knows of another Daniel. But this is the only Daniel we know. So, and also we know a righteous person, would they not have known that he is in the palace and doing great things with Nebuchadnezzar's administration, standing up to it, even as he served Nebuchadnezzar, as he continued to pray towards Jerusalem, as he continued not to eat the dainty food of the palace? Could the exiles, those in Tel Aviv, not know that there is a godly man in the palace? I'm sure they do. I'm sure that there is, by word of mouth, the grapevine would have alerted them to it. So I have no doubt that it's the same Daniel, but then I'm no scholar. So here we, at this moment, like I said, the elders of the Israelites in exile is very concerned about Jerusalem, what's happening there, because they have children still there, they have relatives still there. So, and definitely in chapter 14, there are survivors, that their children survive, but we don't, like I said, not necessarily righteous people, but there will be survivors as the next group in the final desolation of, after the siege, the final ending of the siege and the final desolation of Jerusalem. This next group goes into exile in Babylon, and we know what happened to King Zedekiah. His kids were slaughtered in front of him in Jerusalem. He himself was blinded and taken in chains into exile in Babylon. So I'm sure the grapevine inside Babylon, even in Tel Aviv, would have been talking about this. They would know, and they would see the judgment of God, that he was serious. He was serious, because God said, I will do it. I will not change my mind. So next we will, in chapter 18, we will do a very important section where this famous verse, the fathers eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. What does that mean? Stay tuned.